some of the staff do before we get started. What do you call a pony with a sore throat? A little horse. A couple years ago, I did my internship when I was still in college at Chicago First Church of the Nazarene. Contrary to the name, it was not actually in Chicago, it's in the suburbs in Lamont in the south. But it did actually start in Chicago. You can actually go see the original cornerstone that was at the church until the 60s when it moved to the suburbs. But since then, they had started a satellite church on the west side of Chicago in a neighborhood called Austin. Now, Austin is one of the roughest neighborhoods in Chicago. In the span of a month, there were 137 reports of violent crime and 6 homicides. Now, and one of my favorite things to do during my internship was to go up to that church, worship together with the people at that church, and then I would have the rest of the day to just explore the city. And there was one particular Sunday where I was thinking, you know what sounds really good right now? Some Popeyes chicken. So pulled up my map on my phone, found Popeyes, and I said to myself, I can walk that far. I took the bus back, but that's not the point. I was walking to Popeyes, I was waiting at an intersection, and this couple walks up. Now, I didn't hear the whole conversation, but the guy was talking to his wife, girlfriend, female companion, whatever, and he says, some guy walks up to you and he says, hey, now I'm not going to use the word he used. You can use your imagination as to what word he actually used, but let's just say he said, hey, buddy, give me a hug. Would you give him a hug? And I didn't hear her answer, but he directed the same question to me. Some guy comes up to you and he says, hey, buddy, give me a hug. Would you give him a hug? I said, of course, everybody needs a hug. And he liked my answer because we hugged right there at the intersection in Austin. So I want to ask you this morning, but before I do that, we have to go to the Word. Jesus tells a story in Luke chapter 14:15. He's a guest of a Pharisee, probably a very well-respected one. He turns to his host and says, don't invite your friends, your family, or any notable people in town, for you will be repaid. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, and the blind, the ones who cannot pay you back. Jesus goes on to say, he says, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell anyone who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have just bought a field, so I must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Another said, I just got married, so I can't come. I love that excuse. I can't use it yet, but. The servant came back to his master and he reported, then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly to the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. He said, sir, what do you have ordered has been done, but there is still room. Then the master told his servant, go to the roads, the country lanes, and compel them to come, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who will be invited will get a taste of my banquet. In this story, this parable, we see the free grace and mercy of Christ that's available to everyone. It's a sneak peek to what's waiting for us when we get to heaven. It imagines a grand feast with all the food and drink that you can think of, with everyone gathering around the table. I think that's why we love eating together. We love our Thanksgiving, we love our Christmas dinners. The parable from Christ, this story points out one overwhelming fact, that God has prepared a kingdom which is more sufficient for everyone who has ever been born in this world. The man who has prepared this feast is our Father. And the servant who was sent out 3 times to invite people is Christ. The 3 groups which Christ invited are likely the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Levites, the commoner people, the common Jews, and the Gentiles. But the main point is that before inviting the Gentiles, Jesus, the servant in this story, says, there is still room. And that's what he's saying to us today. There is still room at the table. So what are we going to do about it? Now, in the summer, in this time, our tables turn into backyards and decks, which we have grills, barbecues. So my question is, who's invited to your table? Who's invited to your grill out? Who's invited to your barbecue? Is it the neighbor who just lost a loved one? Is it a member of your church family who doesn't have the means to go home? Is it the neighbor who can't go home because they've been disowned by their own family because they're homosexual? How ridiculous would it be to invite a family of Syrian refugees to your table? How ridiculous would it be for a Christian who wasn't scared or afraid to go to Syria and make an apostle out of an ISIS terrorist, just as Ananias of Damascus made an apostle out of Saul the terrorist? Now, if you're anything like me, there's those moments in movies and TVs that they can't help but make you cry. Maybe I'm just emotional. I don't know. For me, one of those moments comes from one of my favorite TV, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And there's an episode where Will's deadbeat father comes back. He comes to visit him in Bel-Air. And if you watch it, Will's father does what he usually does. He just walks out without any warning or notice. Now, if you watch it, Will vents out to his Uncle Phil, and he suddenly breaks down. And then the whole time, Uncle Phil doesn't say a word, while Will's saying, I made through 14 birthdays, I got through my first date without him, I learned how to shave without him, I learned how to drive without him, and still, Uncle Phil doesn't say a word. And then suddenly, Will just starts breaking down crying. And Uncle Phil still doesn't say a word, and he just embraces him. And now what's interesting is that Will Smith, the actor, not the character, is the son of a deadbeat father. So Uncle Phil embracing Will, that wasn't acting. That was genuine emotion and a perfect example we are to be to everyone. And it's not enough just to cry about those emotional movies or TV moments. Which brings to my next question. When's the last time you cried for your city? Jesus sets the standard. When he came to earth, did he have any other motive than love? Did he expect any kind of repayment or response when he came? Did he expect any kind of repayment? Did he get any kind of reciprocation? I don't think so. Because for so he loved the world that he sent his one and only Son. Now he calls us to love. He doesn't call for people who sit on the sidelines. He calls for workers. He doesn't call for bench warmers, armchair quarterbacks who tell the other people who are working how to do it. He tells us to get in the trenches and work. People who are actively involved in the field and the work. The God who calls us to work is the same God who calls us to love. If you're still not convinced, here's some reasons to love others. First, it's commanded. Psalm 82, 4-3 says, "Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy and deliver them from the hand of the wicked." Galatians 5:13-14 says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." Another reason is it's the least we can do. 1 John 4:19, which is actually one of my favorite verses, says, we love because he first loved us. Another reason is we've all been there. We know what it feels like to be lost. We know what it feels like to not where you're going. When you're lost, you feel like he forgot about you, he threw you away, I've gone too far, I'm too messed up, I'm too far out there. I heard it best from one of my favorite pastor's speakers, Chris Rice. He says, Jesus tells the story of a parable. He says, you got 100 sheep and one of your sheep wanders off. You got 99 sheep. Which one of you wouldn't say, I'm going to leave the 99 and go after? See, here's the thing. God already owns all 100 of the sheep. But God knows what's going to happen with the one. Because we've all been that one sheep. I have on my phone and on my lock screen, I have a message that I see anytime I open my phone. And it says, "Step into the ridiculous." It's a reminder to me that in comparison, the plans that God makes for me are ridiculous in comparisons to the plans that I make for myself. But not only that is a reminder, it's a reminder to keep my eye out for the opportunity on others who don't normally see love extended to them, as ridiculous as they come. So, my challenge to you is look for that ridiculous moment that's going to top the moment that moment I had with the stranger on a street corner in Austin, in Chicago. When that guy asked me, somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey buddy, give me a hug." Would you give him a hug? Look for that moment where you can be the face of God's love.